Here are the thoughts on Session 2 of Star Trek Adventures, played with Joe and Anthony and KC. There was a little bit of chit-chat at the end between among three of us, which you'll be seeing in due time in the array of videos that Anthony will be releasing. I'll refer briefly to the topics directly related to my thoughts. One is the general issue that I'm observing through a number of consults, which is when you have a system where the mechanics can be routinely and almost always massaged through the application of a secondary mechanic. And when the resource limits for that don't really seem limiting or are structured in some way that doesn't, you're not hitting the limits, then you're basically playing in this bed of safety. There's always a point to spend. There's always, a way to maneuver the results. And so you only, take it in the teeth when you want to. Well, anyway, that's a topic of some interest, easily distracting me from what I want to talk about in this video. The second topic that we discussed at that time was the interesting situation of a game where you have some kind of value statement, I believe, or a position on things as a formal statement on your sheet. And part of play is the capacity to change this. Now, this goes back a long, long way in role-playing. And one of the ways that this has been altered in the last couple of decades is for it to be a positive thing, and in fact tied to improvement of the character in other things, what you might think of as, advancement, experience points, all the things that make a character more effective, and to have a hinge point for that be some transformation of their values. So effectively, you're looking at a new character in lots of ways besides just the improvement in quantities. Okay, well, Star Trek Adventures has this, and one thing that I've noted about games with this is how the entire idea is easily suborned when we don't see the, position A expressed in play to a substantial amount before the big transformation and the questioning, where you either confirm or you refute or transform that position. And then you have some either new position or a new brand of the old one, and your character is also more effective. Well, anyway, we talked about that, and when it is powerful and when it is distracting and turns into kind of a hamster wheel of not very interesting play. Okay, so those were what we talked about at the end of the session, among other things. Now, what about the topic for this, just you and me here? It has to do with the notion of intentions and priorities and decisions that have put us all in this situation. And when I say us all, I mean the player characters, and in this case, the supporting characters that we kind of drift in and out of play all the time. And the situation, I mean what they face. So I'm talking about the fictional situation and the immediacy of it. Here are our characters in the midst of it. Other characters are also in the midst of it. Well, who got us here? Whose decisions or life history or basically outlooks has led to what my character at the moment is perceiving as a crisis. And sometimes that can be generated from the characters themselves, and there's plenty of games in which that's the case. I mean, the situation is effectively normal and for better or for worse, and the character is bringing with them, this helping of issues that is going to change everything, mess everything up, perhaps. Whereas I'm talking now about external adversity. Our characters may or may not have their issues and their problems, but what really matters is that someone else does. And we have ended up in proximity to this someone else, and someone else says, usually, and we have this crisis to contend with. You can handle this as sort of, here we ride into town and see who's causing trouble around here, and we fix it all up. That's not really what I'm talking about in our game and in the original Star Trek. The results of such a confrontation, the results of that interaction, I think, are more interesting than merely, let's go find the person who's hurting and give them a hug, or let's go find the person who's bad and, put them in a nice home. Instead, we are dealing with somewhat more troublesome outcomes. But that's for play. I'm talking about effectively prep. In a game of this kind, where you do have a person who's responsible for saying, and you come to this planet and it's purple. You meet this person and they say this. This beam hits your ship and it does that. All these things that are occurring, or that we may be encountering here and may encounter later. I'm talking about the times when somebody is up to something. Now, again, a really simplistic way of doing this is to say, well, it's a boss. We have to work our way up. We got to investigate, and we got to fight, some little guys, and we've got to get bushwhacked once or twice. But, we'll figure out, or have it basically land on us that this is, the one to defeat, and we'll solve the problem by defeating that. I'm not really talking about that either. I'm talking more in terms of there's no, easy solution. Shooting a guy in the face is not going to solve the problem. We've got to cope with multiple hassles and multiple priorities. Some of the non-player characters may well be adaptable in response to us. Some of them may even change their minds relative to us and our role, or to the situation that they themselves have brought themselves to. Who knows? But it's dynamic. So what I'm focusing on is the intention thereof. Let's say that there isn't any. Let's say that the zapper that apparently zapped the Potemkin, I suppose, and is currently zapping us, that is to say the ship, and the tectonic and seismic problems that the planet is experiencing, apparently coming from the same place. Let's just say it's an ancient device and it just went on, its timer went off. Or let's say that, an accident occurred. The colony drilled, and it, that set up the harmonics, and that set up the frequencies, and that set up the vibrations, and oops, So maybe something like that. In which case there really isn't any intention of the moment that's causing trouble. That's doable. That's possible. You could say that the ship throws a rod and now we are about to blow up. So let's, see if we can avoid that fate. Same kind of thing. None of that is terribly, terribly bad. If we have really, really interesting protagonists and different values end up being complicated or challenged, which is the mechanical language for it in the game, then all to the good. So I'm not saying such a thing as a bad plot. If we are facing at this time such a situation, and if we may encounter one in the future, you're not going to catch me, bitching. However, the strongest ones, and I would say that I don't have a demand for it, I don't have an expectation for it, I don't have a hope for it, because all of those are transitive toward Anthony. I'm talking about internally. A priority. Okay? Can you imagine a priority that's not an expectation or a demand? That's what I'm talking about. A priority, something I find very important, is the notion that such situations do have volition involved. And it may not be the plot to do exactly the thing that we are facing as a problem, it's probably or can be more emergent from the way that different personalities, different priorities, or different historical circumstances, different accidents involved have led to this. And so we have a lot of individuals, perhaps, right, either doubling down on what they were up to or trying to change what they were up to, or who knows what. They may be in conflict with one another. They may be in unity with one another. There's all sorts of possibilities. But the idea is that there are decision makers that have led us here. Even if the solution is very simplistic and just involves rigging a thing or just involves shooting someone or whatever it is, still it's due to the outcomes of all these things. There's local historicity, there's local personality, there's local decision making, both immediately before we get there or during while we're there. And in the original show, some, I think, of the strongest early episodes are like this. And the sort of painful realization that fairly ordinary or understandable priorities or features of being, a human being, or that kind of creature, or in this economic circumstance or whatever, in many cases, they are stories about human and human-like decisions coming into confrontation with one another. For a situation that really doesn't have, an easy way out, if there is a direct action that will do it, you kind of wish you didn't have to take that direct action, perhaps. Or if it doesn't have an easy direct action, then you've got a complicated situation. And again, under those circumstances, it may be that values, at the very least, just get invoked, which is cool, and as a happy outcome, depending on player priorities and interests, may see complication and challenge. Not obliged, but could be cool. That sort of context for the situations we face. Again, not a demand and not even, gee, I hope Anthony GMs the way that, I want him to. More in the order of that's where I sit. And if that doesn't happen or isn't the case for our adventures, then okay. But here I'm talking, let's just look at these fictional adverse situations and say, what is, their fictional identity? Did people do this in some way? On purpose or not on purpose, or, horribly motivated or wonderfully motivated or whatever. But however it's turned out, this is session worthy, episode worthy, if you will. And it's not, just because, the science fiction widget got flipped by the science fiction effect and okay, now we have a problem. It's more understandable than that. You can see how we could end up here. So anyway, that's where we're at. It's okay to have different priorities about these things. That's why we do this together. And afford different individuals different responsibilities. Prep is Anthony's thing. So what's going on, if you will, in this scenario, aside from what we have going on when we deal with it. And so that's cool. Wherever we go with that is fine by me. But it's an interesting look into preparation for this game, because not seeing mention of that distinction in the book. So for better or for worse, this is a priority that I'm bringing, counter-textual or at least atextual. And we'll see how that flies as we continue to play.